In this video, we continue our exploration of what we call documentary sources, material that not only supplements but at times challenges the grand narratives written by the renowned historians of antiquity, such as Thucydides, Herodotus, Livy, or Tacitus and all their peers. Today, we focus on inscriptions in the Aramaic dialect of Palmyra, a city in Syria. Palmyra was home to a fascinating culture shaped by both Roman and Parthian influences, the arch-enemies of the Romans with their empire in Persia, nowadays Iran. However, Palmyra has always retained its distinct identity, a unique blend of local traditions and external elements. The study of Palmyra and its inscriptions is a subject particularly close to my heart as I am working with these texts and was visiting the city 11 times between 1995 and the outbreak of the Syrian war in 2011. Inscriptions from Palmyra, spanning from the mid-1st century BCE to the end of the 3rd century CE, are among the richest resources for epigraphers and those interested in ancient prosopography, the study of individuals within their social context. These inscriptions are unparalleled in their scope across the ancient world. Yet, like most epigraphic evidence, they primarily reflect the lives of the elites, those who had the means to immortalize their names in stone. As always, we must use our imagination to reconstruct the world these inscriptions reveal. Therefore, some aspects of the story presented here involve educated guesswork, contextualization, and, at times, hypothetical interpretations and a bit of fantasy, just like, by the way, this image here looks sufficiently close to Palmyra but doesn't exactly capture the shape and the beauty of this famous city in the Syrian desert. The knowledge we derive from inscriptions comes from the surviving epigraphical evidence. This means that out of the millions of texts once inscribed across a variety of materials in antiquity, we are left with only what has endured. While inscriptions have been made on many materials, stone, metal, wood, bone, ceramic, and even wax tablets, the surviving ratio has shifted dramatically over time. In particular, inscriptions in stone have survived in far greater quantities, shaping our historical examination. This often leads to a focus on the writings of the wealthy, while much textual material written on less durable and cheaper materials has been lost. In this video, however, we will also examine a rare inscription carved into wood, providing a fascinating glimpse into an unusual form of documentation. While we must always be cautious when relying on negative evidence in our arguments, the absence of an inscription can sometimes be meaningful in itself. Of course, the fact that we haven't discovered an inscription which we expect doesn't necessarily imply it was never recreated. But let's explore how we can connect the available evidence in the story of Abgar, the sailor. Our story begins on the island of Socotra, located in the Arabian Sea off the coast of Yemen, about 240 kilometers southeast of the Arabian Peninsula. It lies near the Horn of Africa, positioned between the Gulf of Aden and the Arabian Sea. Socotra is part of Yemen, but in recent years it has been under de facto occupation by the United Arabian Emirates as part of their involvement in the Yemeni civil war. While the future of the island remains uncertain, some inhabitants have expressed approval of the UAE's presence, citing improved infrastructure and support. Socotra served as a hub in ancient maritime trade routes connecting the Red Sea and the Indian Ocean. Its strategic location facilitated commerce among the Arabian Peninsula, East Africa, the Indian subcontinent, and Sri Lanka. The island's involvement in these trade networks is well documented, with evidence of its role in the exchange of goods such as spices, frankincense, and other aromatic resins. The so-called Periplus of the Erythraean Sea, a 1st century CE Greek navigation guide, mentions Socotra as a significant stopover for merchants traveling between the Red Sea and the Indian Ocean. The map you can see here depicts the maritime trade in the 1st century. Our story, however, takes place in the middle of the 3rd century, at the heyday of the Palmyrene Empire. Here you can see the location of the oasis city of Palmyra, or Tadmor in Aramaic, as well as that of Spasinu-Charax, an ancient port at the head of the Persian Gulf in modern-day Iraq. This harbor is not central to our story, but it is worth mentioning since we know that the Palmyrenes had a trading post, an emporium, there. The city of Palmyra rose to prominence and power not only as a vital trading hub on the land route between Mesopotamia and the Roman Empire, but also through the Palmyrenes' role as protectors of trade caravans. They safeguarded these caravans from the raids of nomadic brigands who roamed the vast steppes and deserts of the region, and with this they made the real money. More than simply engaging in trade, the people of Palmyra acted as crucial facilitators of commerce in a globalized world in antiquity. In recent years, however, it has become clear that the Palmyrenes were not only dominant in land trade, but also held significant influence in maritime trade. Much of the research on this subject has been conducted by the Norwegian scholar Eivind Heldås Selon, whose monograph on the topic can be found in the bibliography at the end of this video. No one could have anticipated that the island of Socotra would be linked to Palmyra until a rather sensational discovery in the year 2000. Until then, the island of Socotra was largely off the radar of epigraphers. This changed when a Belgian team of geologists and speleologists, cave researchers, led by Peter de Geest, explored the island for geological purposes. During their exploration of the Hock Cave on Socotra's northeast coast, they uncovered a significant corpus of inscriptions and drawings. These inscriptions were predominantly in Indian languages, including Sanskrit and Sanskrit-related languages in various ancient alphabets. Additionally, there were inscriptions in South Arabian, Aksumite, that's the language of ancient Ethiopia, Greek, and one in Palmyrene Aramaic. This discovery revolutionized our understanding of Socotra's role in ancient trade and cultural exchanges. Before this discovery, Socotra had primarily attracted the attention of biologists due to its unique and endemic flora and fauna. Among its most famous features is the dragon blood tree, known for its distinctive umbrella-like shape, and the red resin it produces, which has been valued for centuries. The Socotra golden-winged grosbeak is another rare gem native to Socotra. Known for its bold beak, this bird is a true island celebrity. Personally, I am more inclined to admire plants than birds, so I imagine the grosbeak wearing the traditional dress of the region. The real bird probably looks quite different from this. As we have already heard, Socotra is home to numerous caves which attract researchers due to their unique geological formations, including stalactites, stalagmites, and other limestone structures. One such cave, the Hock Cave, is renowned for its vast complex interior and exceptional natural features, making it a prime subject for geological study. In antiquity, however, it must also have been considered as a sacred space where people made offerings to a deity, perhaps the main god of the island. Apart from exploring inscriptions and the role of prosopography, we also want to acquire some practical knowledge, like how to tell the difference between stalagmites and stalactites. Here's a simple trick: T for hanging from the top, and M for mountain, or if you prefer, T for teardrop and M for minaret. Leaning against yes, exactly, a stalagmite, the researchers discovered a wooden tablet inscribed with a text in Palmyrene Aramaic. The cave's unique humid microclimate offered an ideal environment for the tablet's preservation. While inscriptions elsewhere in the Hock cave were scratched into various surfaces, the discovery of this tablet in such an unlikely location underscores how unexpected findings can surface in the most surprising contexts. Now let's take a look at a photograph of the wooden tablet. First, it's important to note that wood does not exist on Socotra. We have seen the remarkable trees, but they do not produce timber suitable for buildings or for wooden tablets like this. Did the writer of the inscription bring this blank with him on his journey to Socotra? We know that he was a man. That's certainly possible. However, we might also consider that it could have come from a shipwrecked boat or some other form of flotsam and jetsam. The tablet bears a carefully engraved text spanning 11 lines with the letters filled in with dark pigment to highlight them. Since the inscription mentions the word here, or at this place, that's how the Palmyrines would express this word, we can assume that the writer perhaps wrote the text right outside the cave that was considered a sacred space in antiquity. The script used is what we call cursive. This is particularly intriguing for those of us studying inscriptions. While the Greeks, Romans, and of course the Palmyrines typically employed a more standardized block-shaped script for their official inscriptions, we call this monumental, instances of cursive writing, essentially the real handwriting of the people, are rare. In these rare cases, we gain insight into how individuals used their alphabets in everyday contexts rather than in the formal setting of monumental inscriptions. This is the text. On the 25th day of the month Tammuz of the year 569, that is July 258 CE, came I, Abgar, the son of Abisamaya, a summer, to this place in the plain of my soul. Be blessed, deity, which has brought me to this place. You, who are reading this tablet, bless me or bless us, and you shall leave the tablet at its present location. The last sentence includes what we call a sanctio here. Abgar requests in a rather friendly manner that his inscription be left undisturbed, a request that was honored until 2001, when the inscription was removed for further scientific study. In contrast, other examples of sanctio clauses prescribe far grimmer consequences for those who tamper with or alter inscriptions. For instance, becoming struck with blindness ranks among the top 10 curses that would be invoked in such contexts. What do we learn about Abgar? He must have been from Palmyra, as his name is unmistakably Palmyrene, though it is also attested in other Near Eastern cities and empires. More tellingly, the use of the Palmyrene language and script confirms his origin. He identifies himself as a summer, a term that is a hapax legomenon in Palmyrene Aramaic, meaning it is only found in this text and not elsewhere. To understand its meaning, we look to related Aramaic dialects and other Semitic languages. One possibility is that it refers to an emissary, but in South Arabian the term seems to align with a verb meaning to hoist up the sails, suggesting that Abgar was a sailor. Could it be that Abgar set sail from Spasinu-Charax intending on reaching India, only to be swept off course by the powerful monsoon winds? The storm may have carried his vessel far beyond his intended destination, perhaps even capsizing it, leaving him to be washed ashore on the remote island of Socotra. Or was the stop at Socotra part of a deliberate plan? While such a detour would be unusual, we cannot entirely rule out the possibility. Perhaps Abgar had specifically set course for Socotra, drawn by the allure of the mystical Hock cave, seeking to pray at its sacred site. This would suggest that Abgar's presence on Socotra might have been far more than a mere accident of the wind. But we will never know, and we must leave Abgar on Socotra now, because we want to zoom into a business deal far away from that island in the Arabian Sea and have a look at what happened in the city of Palmyra. In the year 263, that is 5 years after Abgar's inscription, a woman from Palmyra, Julia Aurelia Amata, was absolutely overjoyed. She had just pulled off a deal that would elevate her family status even further. The family was already on the rise, their wealth steadily increasing, but the question remained how to invest this fortune in a way that would show the rest of Palmyra that they had truly arrived. Palmyra was a marvelous place to live, of course, but Julia Aurelia Amata knew that her fellow citizens were equally invested in how they departed this world. The city's tomb towers, rising high above the landscape, represented the prime real estate of the afterlife. Sure, there were underground tomb chambers hidden away beneath the earth, but let's face it, if you wanted to make a statement, those towering structures were where your family's legacy would really shine. After all, it wasn't just about living well, it was about being remembered in grand style for eternity. These tomb towers in Palmyra contained hundreds of niches filled with what we call loculi slabs. A loculus was the opening of a rectangular niche, typically sealed by a limestone slab around 40 centimeters in height, cut to fit snugly over the niche where the mortal remains of a family member were placed. On the stone slab, a portrait bust of the deceased was carved, presenting the individual in a frontal pose, sometimes with their hands depicted in various gestures. The portrait was probably always accompanied by an inscription, usually in Palmyrene Aramaic, though many examples are also bilingual, with Greek or sometimes Latin versions of the inscriptions included. These inscriptions were typically carved into the stone, though some were probably simply painted with red pigment. This is what we assume for the pieces that nowadays have lost their inscriptions. The inscriptions highlighted the names and lineage, that is, the pedigree of the deceased, and often also mentioned the year they passed away, or some other information such as their profession or the names of those who commissioned the loculus in the first place. These carved portraits and inscriptions were not merely functional. They served as powerful statements of identity and status, ensuring that the family's legacy would be remembered. The combination of portraiture and inscription on these slabs was a defining aspect of Palmyrene funerary culture, emphasizing the importance of personal and familial remembrance in the afterlife, and, as Julia Aurelia Amata would certainly note, a way to demonstrate one's wealth and social standing. There has been a long-standing debate in scholarship over whether these portraits truly depict the likeness of the deceased. Recent studies suggest that they likely did, although it is important to recognize that a considerable degree of idealization was involved. The precise process by which these busts were created remains unclear, though we might liken it to how modern police create composite images when searching for a suspect. When, for example, your aunt passed away in Palmyra in the 250s, you'd likely sit down with a stone carver to discuss the specifics of her appearance, her nose, ears, and eyes. And of course, Julia Aurelia Amata would add the jewelry your aunt wore, ensuring that the bust would reflect these details, whether she owned those gems in life or not. Julia Aurelia Amata smiled. But let's return to her business deal. Julia Aurelia Amata knew that another prominent Palmyrene family had somewhat overextended themselves with their grand tomb tower. Julius Aurelius Yedibil, now the head of his family, was the proud owner of this oversized monument. However, the family's fortunes had taken a downturn in recent years, and Amata, ever astute, recognized that they were in need of money. And she, of course, had money to spare. So she proposed a solution. She would buy into the tomb tower. Specifically, she requested 2 wings of the structure. Yedibel, eager for the funds, was more than happy to oblige. And so, a stone-carved inscription would proudly mark this transaction, ensuring that all who passed by would know of it. remember the Sanctio passage in the wooden inscription, Amata, ever the savvy businesswoman, insisted on an inscription in Yedibel's tomb tower. This way, everyone would know not only that she had legally purchased the 2 wings from the rightful owners, but also, for generations to come, that her family's members had been properly interred in another family's tower. Amata glanced at Yedibel. And no, in case you're wondering, they were probably not related, though one can never be entirely sure with the elites. Their similar names were a sign of the increasing number of Palmyrines granted Roman citizenship, particularly under emperors bearing the name Aurelius. By the 3rd century, it was common for members of Palmyra's upper class to adopt names like Julius Aurelius or Julia Aurelia. Amata's eyes lingered on the man, now forced to part with his family's precious funerary property, an essential marker of status. Poor fellow, she thought. The weight of financial ruin had visibly aged him. Of course, Julia Aurelia Amata had known Yedibel since childhood, when they had played hide-and-seek in the colonnaded streets of the city. He had grown into a handsome young man, Amata thought, but there was something about his brother, Abgar, that had always held a different allure. Every young woman in Palmyra turned her head when Abgar passed through the streets, and Amata couldn't deny the subtle shiver that ran down her spine when she thought of him now. She had, after all, harbored a quiet affection for Abgar in her teenage days. His striking appearance was undeniable, but it was his restless spirit that intrigued her. He was never content with the luxurious comforts of the city, always yearning to explore the world beyond. One day he had set sail on a grand voyage, never to return. Sailors like Abgar often stayed away for years, but now, after all this time, no one truly expected him to come back. There had been financial losses for the family, all that expensive cargo for which they paid in advance. But for Amata, the purchase of the 2 wings of the funerary tower had proved to be a fortunate deal. "Any news from Abgar?" Amata asked. Yedibel sighed. And 2 years later, he would sell 4 more niches of the tomb tower to her, we know, from a second inscription. How do we know that Yedibel and Abgar were most likely brothers? Well, in the inscriptions, the Palmyrines were keen to provide their lineages or pedigrees. For many, it was standard to list their fathers and usually their grandfathers' names, and sometimes the generations even further back in time. In the beginning of this video, I mentioned prosopography, a field derived from the Greek word for face or person. It is the study of relationships between people at a specific moment in time, in our case in ancient Palmyra. This could be political, who was working with whom, or genealogical. Thankfully, Palmyra's inscriptions are a treasure trove for prosopography, as they offer such a rich material about the lineages of its inhabitants. These genealogical records, which we call stemmata, or in the singular, one stemma, give us a unique glimpse into ancient family dynamics. Since all of Palmyra's inscriptions come from a relatively small geographic area, the city and its surroundings, and cover a short time span of roughly 300 to 350 years, we can reconstruct a comprehensive who is who of ancient Palmyra, how families built allegiances, how they formed bonds via marriage, and so on. In this case, we are fortunate thanks to a very happy coincidence. Abgar mentioned his father in his inscription on Socotra. Names like Abgar, Amata, and Yedibel are common, which doesn't help us much. But Abisamaya, Abgar's father, is an extraordinarily rare name. In fact, it is only attested in 2 other inscriptions, which you might have guessed are the 2 texts that Julia Aurelia Amata commissioned for the tomb tower. She had purchased 2 wings and, a little later, 4 more niches from Julius Aurelius Yedibel, the son of Abisamaya, who was in turn the son of a certain Malco. Once more, a super common name, but we have to thank this Malco for picking the most unusual name for his son. Now, given that all three inscriptions are dated and the name Abysamaya is so rare, we can be certain that this connection links Abgar's inscription on Socotra with the ones in Palmyra. As for whether a martyr really had a crush on Abgar, well, that remains one of history's more tantalizing, though unprovable, mysteries. Did Abgar return to Palmyra? From all that we know, it seems he did not. There are approximately 3,000 known funerary busts and inscriptions from the city, but none of them belongs to our Abgar. Perhaps his inscription has yet to be discovered, or more likely, if it did exist, it was sold on the antiquities market and has not resurfaced. Alternatively, and this seems the more plausible scenario, Abgar never returned, and the wooden inscription in which he calls upon a god for safe passage may very well be the last time we hear of him. The literature on Palmyra is extensive, however, our inscription was first analyzed following its discovery by the Belgian team, by the esteemed French scholar Christian Robin, in collaboration with Maria Gorea. The latter has also written a concise chapter in English, which serves as the definitive source on this inscription. If you're interested in learning more, this is the text I would recommend you to read. Check out the Academia Edu page of Maria Gorea, where she has uploaded the full text of her chapter.